Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're talking about a surprise in the Canadian election, the focus of our political leaders on animal welfare. Or maybe it shouldn't be a surprise. Canadians love animals, and putting policy ideas forward to protect our animal friends seems like something that would get a lot of popular support. The Conservative, Liberal, NDP, and Green platforms all include commitments for animal welfare. I'm an animal lover, and I especially love dogs. This is a picture of my dog, Mishka, a caisson dog that we got from a really exceptional breeder in the Ottawa area. And I'll admit that I was really excited when I saw our political leaders talking about cracking down on puppy mills. So what exactly are the commitments, and what are our laws related to animal welfare now today? Will these policy promises change anything? And is this policy focus surprising? Here today to talk about this topic is lawyer Camille Labchuk, an animal welfare specialist and executive director at Animal Justice, Canada's only national animal law not-for-profit. Camille, thanks so much for joining me today. So why do you think politicians are suddenly talking about animal welfare laws? Is this just good politics? Because there have been attempts in the past to reform animal welfare laws, but I think it just hasn't happened.
I actually think it's more surprising that they haven't started talking about them until this election, given what you noted, Christine, in your introduction about how much Canadians care about animal protection. It really is a fundamental value for many people who share their lives with cats and dogs and care about animals who are used in a variety of different respects. So I think we're finally starting to see politicians responding to public attitudes and realizing that we've got this disconnect between how much people care about animals and how bad our laws are. And they know that to be responsive to the electorate, they've got to catch up. So that's why we're seeing these commitments finally.
So as I said, there have been attempts to have some reforms to our animal welfare laws in the past, but there has been pushback from, in particular, industry groups. So do you think that this type of talk that we're seeing from our leaders is good for the campaign, but we might not actually see anything happen if people get elected?
Well, I think you could probably say that about any issue that's discussed during elections. It's always one thing to make campaign promises and commitments, and another thing to get into office and actually implement those commitments. So I know that whatever a politician says on the campaign trail is still going to be a struggle to get them to pass laws. But I do think that we've got this critical mass right now of people who are very engaged in animal protection and people who've opened their eyes and realized that Canada, despite thinking of ourselves as a compassionate country, we actually have some of the worst animal protection laws in the Western world. We don't have national animal protection legislation, and we've fallen so far behind other jurisdictions. So, I don't think it's an issue that politicians can ignore. And I hope once we get back to governing after this election, we're going to see lots of sustained pressure from Canadians and more action.
So I think what's been getting a lot of attention in the campaign, it relates to pet animals, but this is only a small part of the picture. Do you think people get lost when we move from talking about protecting pet animals to farm animals, which make up the large percentage of the animals in this country?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, most of us share our homes with cats or dogs or other animals, but the largest number of animals that we use in this country is farmed animals. We slaughter over 800 million animals on farms per year. And unfortunately, many of those animals live in really terrible conditions because we don't actually have national or provincial laws governing their treatment on farms or public inspections, which is really surprising. So I think that oftentimes people come to care about animals because of their personal experiences with cats or dogs. That's certainly how I did. And then later start to realize that there's all these other animals who have the same capacities as their cats and dogs who are also suffering and deserve some respect too. So I think we're seeing an expansion of that feeling of compassion and empathy towards those members of our society.
So we've got about a minute, but how do Canada's laws compare to other developed countries? You said that we're not as good, but how would we compare to, say, the United States?
Yes, unfortunately, we've fallen very far behind even the United States. And I know it's a national pastime to think of ourselves as superior to Americans, but when it comes to animal laws, we're certainly not. Let's just take the example of dog breeding. In the States, there are national regulations governing, pet stores and dog breeders and individuals involved in that trade. In Canada, we have virtually nothing. In a couple of provinces, there's some minor regulation, but nothing that really stops the issue of puppy mills, for instance, and stops these unethical breeders from breeding large amounts of dogs and selling them for massive profits. So we have a lot of catching up to do.
When we come back from this commercial break, I want to dig into some of the platform promises, and we'll go through them party by party. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're talking about animal welfare laws and the election. So I want to dig into what the different parties are promising, because it's kind of was surprising to me to see them make these commitments. And I'll start with the Conservatives, because I think they were the first one to make this an election issue. And they've made a big splash with some of their announcements. And I think that Aaron O'Toole was campaigning with his dog for one of the days. What were some of the commitments that the Conservative Party made related to animal welfare?
Well, I think the biggest one that grabbed headlines was a commitment to crack down on puppy mills, which, as we just discussed, are pretty terrible operations where people mass breed and produce puppies because puppies can fetch a handsome price on the retail market, especially with the pandemic and more people having time to be at home and raise a puppy. Has resulted in a puppy shortage and animals both being imported from outside the country from poor conditions and bred locally in poor conditions as well. So
I want to ask you about that. So, like, what exactly is a puppy mill, and when they say ban or crack down, what does that look like? What are they proposing to do?
Well, that's a good question, because the platform that the Conservatives released is still a little sparse on the details. So the headline says ban puppy mills, but when you look at the details, they say that they'll prevent unethical breeders from marketing themselves as rescues or smaller breeders. So it's not actually clear to me that they do plan to regulate and license dog breeders, which I think is a really essential way of cracking down on puppy mills. Right now, we don't even know who's breeding dogs in most parts of this country because there's no requirement to get a license or register or anything like that. So officials can't even go inspect breeders to see how the conditions are. And I think that's a really important part of what we need to see to crack down on this problem.
So one of the other things that the Conservatives talked about was a promise to end cosmetic testing on animals. So what is that going to look like? And is animal testing required now for products?
It's not currently required for cosmetics, although some companies still engage in it. And what has been proposed in previous previous parliamentary sessions was a bill that would outlaw cosmetic testing locally in Canada, but also make it so that companies can't rely on cosmetic testing data that's done maybe in some other country and can't import cosmetics that were tested on animals abroad. So pretty comprehensive stuff. And unfortunately, there was a bill proposed by the Conservatives that actually didn't pass through the last parliament in 2019 before the 2019 election. And then I think everyone got distracted with the pandemic, and so it didn't get revived. So it's good to see that commitment.
So there's also a promise in the Conservative platform. They say to get tough on abusers who hurt their spouse by abusing their spouse's pet. And they also want to make it easier for women who leave abusive homes to bring their pet with them. They don't want to leave the pet in an abusive home. And there is a link between animal abuse and domestic abuse. So can you talk about that a little bit and about what the Conservative promise is?
Yeah, so I think it's well established that, violence against humans and violence against animals, there's a connection there. And for the same reasons that, humans might be struggling and have criminal justice problems such as poverty or mental health issues, those same factors might lead animals to end up in a poor situation as humans might as well. So there have been concerns raised for a long time around issues where women have tried to leave relationships, and it tends to be women, and can't find a space in a shelter that can also accommodate their cat or their dog or maybe other animals that they have. So I think that's a useful commitment to see.
But realistically, this is less of a federal issue, isn't it? Isn't this sort of a provincial issue? And it's also a funding issue for these women's shelters to have them actually have the ability to take animals as well as people who need a lot of help. So are they proposing having the federal government regulate this, or are they proposing giving provinces funding to fund this? What exactly is going on?
My guess, based on what you mentioned, the federal provincial jurisdiction issue, this is an issue where we need a new law to address a problem. It really is a capacity issue with shelters, as you point out. So I'm guessing what they intend to do is simply provide funding options to more shelters so that they can build more space and accommodate animals in addition to humans.
Well, it would certainly be a great thing, I think, to see. And I don't think there's anyone out there who could be opposed to a policy like that. When we come back from this commercial break, I want to talk about what the other parties are promising, because there was some response, right? The Conservatives put this out. They got a really great response. The Liberals have now added it, or they seem to have added it to their platform. And now the NDP is talking about it as well. So I want to talk when we come back about what the Liberal government has done on animal welfare while they've been in power and what they're proposing to do next. We'll be right back from this commercial break. Welcome back to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and I'm here with Camille Labchuk talking about animal welfare laws and what the different political leaders are promising on animal welfare during the election. But first, I want to look at what the Liberals have done, because they've now made some commitments on animal welfare, but they've also been in power for a number of years. So, Camille, can you tell me what they've done as a government to protect animal welfare?
So in the first term that the Liberals held a majority, there were three significant pieces of animal protection legislation that did pass. And I will note this is kind of a big deal because it's the first time in really over 100 years that Parliament's passed any new animal protection laws, which I think says something pretty poor about the state of things. But the three laws that passed were first a bill banning whale and dolphin captivity and breeding. I should note that applies to future whale and dolphin captivity and breeding because places like Marineland still have animals that really don't have a place to go at this point.
And we actually saw footage recently of the whale at Marineland, which isn't far from the studio, having some problems. It was very heartbreaking to see.
Really difficult to watch. The orca, her name is Kiska, multiple people filmed her slamming her head against the side of her tank in apparent distress. My organization actually submitted a legal complaint to authorities earlier in the summer, asking for an investigation out of concerns that she's experiencing unlawful psychological distress. So it was good to see action on that file.
So there won't be any further orcas in captivity in Canada because of this law?
That's right. That's right. So it is pretty significant. Not a lot of countries have made this move, but I think more of them are considering, and it was good to see Canada move in this direction.
So what are some other things? I think there was also changes to laws around bestiality.
Yes, and it's unfortunate that we even have to have this conversation, but there was a bit of a legal loophole opened up with the Supreme Court ruling in 2016. So the Liberals managed to tighten that loophole up and make sure that all sexual abuse of animals was illegal. They added some additional provisions in the criminal code tackling animal fighting as well. And then the final thing, Christine, is that they outlawed the import of shark fin products into the country. Which is significant because we were a major importer of shark fin, and sharks' populations are being decimated by the cruel practice of slicing off those fins and leaving the sharks to die of predation or drowning.
Yeah, no one wants to see that. There was also a bill that was proposed, Bill C-246, which was modernization to the Animal Protection Act, but that looked like it didn't go anywhere.
Unfortunately not, and it was a bit of a surprise. It was a private member's bill proposed by Liberal MP Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, and he actually modeled it off of previous Liberal legislation that had been introduced in the early 2000s when that party last held office. So everyone expected that the bill would pass quite easily, and what it would have done is simply improve the criminal code animal cruelty offenses to make it easier to prosecute terrible cases of animal cruelty and of neglect. It also would have addressed shark fins and bestiality issue as well, and shut off cat and dog fur imports into the country, which is unfortunately still legal. But surprisingly, the Liberals were lobbied very heavily by the industries, farming, hunting, fishing in particular, who made outrageous and frankly false claims that the bill would have shut down their industries when it was really just about prosecuting abusers. So that bill didn't pass.
So that's what's been done so far. Now, what are the Liberals promising in their platform that they will do on animal welfare?
Well, they also have a cosmetic testing commitment. They're putting a date on it. They're saying as soon as 2023, they would outlaw cosmetic tests on animals. Really significantly, in my view, they've committed to ending toxicity tests on animals by 2035. That's like product testing and regulatory testing that's often required for safety reasons, unlike cosmetics. And that's significant because some of the worst animal experiments are done for regulatory testing. They're also committing to cracking down on the illegal wildlife trade and shutting off elephant and rhinoceros ivory imports. It's not clear to me whether the illegal wildlife trade commitment is tied to the pandemic. We know that future pandemics are very likely to emerge from the wildlife trade when humans interact with wild animals and viruses jump the species barrier. So that's a helpful commitment there as well.
And I think they'd also made a commitment on horse slaughter. What have they made? What have they said about that?
Yeah, that's right. So it's become an issue in the last year or so that's, I think, really prominent on people's minds. Singer-songwriter Jan Arden has been very vocal on this. There was a W5 expose about horse slaughter. They've committed to ending the live shipment of horses outside of the country, specifically.
This is horses for meat consumption, right?
Horses for meat consumption, they're being exported right now by airplane to Japan, often in pretty troubling, cramped conditions. Horses have been known to die on that journey, and it's a very, very small market. So an easy thing to do, and I think a very good move.
Well, when we come back from this commercial break, I want to have a look at what the NDP and the Green parties are promising on animal welfare. So we've talked about the Conservative promises, the Liberal promises. Camille, what are the NDP saying on animal welfare?
Well, their platform is a little light on animal welfare. They don't have a specific section, unlike the Conservatives and the Liberals do this time around. But they are making a commitment to crack down on the domestic and international trade in wild animals, which, again, we know that that is linked to the causation of viruses and pandemics. So that's a really solid commitment. I will say that despite not having a specific section in their platform, that party has historically been very supportive of animal protection initiatives in Parliament. They've always voted for animals when they have the opportunity. And many of their members have put forward private members' bills as well to do things like banning shark fin or outlawing cat and dog for imports.
And how about the Green platform? What are they saying about animal welfare?
Well, the Greens do have the only serious commitment to protecting farmed animals of any party so far in this election. They acknowledge that animal agriculture is a leading driver of climate change. The United Nations says it's about 15% at least of emissions that come from animal agriculture. And so they're promising a shift away from that model and promoting increased plant-based food production and consumption, which is great for the climate, also great for a burgeoning Canadian field of industry. We've got a lot of grain farmers, chickpea farmers, pulse producers, especially out west, who are really benefiting from plant-based production right now. And then the Greens are also promising to regulate welfare conditions for animals on farms. And, it's a pretty troubling oversight that doesn't exist at the moment. So it's really positive to see that commitment.
So what would your organization like to see in a platform? What are some other important animal welfare issues that you think have been left out of the conversation?
Well, one thing, Christine, that we don't have in this country is national animal protection legislation. There's no National Animal Welfare or Animal Protection Act, which is pretty surprising for a country of Canada's size and stature and industrialization. So we would really like to see that. I would really like to see, as the Greens are promising, national legislation regulating the treatment of animals on farms. Unlike many, almost most at this point, US states and the entire European Union, we still allow devices like gestation crates, which are so small that they keep pigs in tiny crates when they can't turn around. We still allow battery cages for chickens that lay eggs, which are so small that they can't even flap their wings. So there's a lot of work to do just to bring national standards into place. And, one exciting thing I can let your listeners know about is that there's actually going to be a national animal protection election debate for the first time ever, which is taking place Sunday, September 12th, featuring the Liberals, the NDP, the Greens, unfortunately not the Conservatives or the Bloc, but it'll be good to see these candidates discuss the issues.
I didn't know about that. I'll have to check it out. One thing I want to ask is, a lot of people care about animals, but they might be intimidated by a conversation about animal welfare. I mean, I love animals, but I don't want to feel like I have to be a vegan or a vegetarian to have a conversation like this. So how do we make the issue of animal welfare and even law reform accessible to people?
I think that's a really important conversation to have because I know most people in this country actually say that they would consider animals when voting. Polls show that 70% of people think it's an important consideration when they cast their ballot. Yet, of course, most people aren't vegetarian or vegan. I don't think that you need to be all the way to support some steps. I think that people, of course, who are still, perhaps consuming meat or dairy or egg products, don't want those animals to suffer while they're being raised for food. I don't think that anyone supports animal suffering, regardless of what sort of personal communities they already belong to. So I think it's a really important thing to do to broaden that conversation. And I really would encourage anyone who cares about these issues even a little bit, just to raise it with your politicians. If you have a chance to meet with your MP or you run into candidates on the campaign trail, just make sure you let them know that it is a priority for you in some respect.
10 seconds. How can people learn more about your organization?
Animaljustice.ca. We also have an election website called votersforanimals.ca where you can see some candidate endorsements of people who've been good on animals and learn more about where the parties stand.
Thanks so much, Camille.
Thank you, Christine.
We've heard today about how animal welfare laws have made a surprising appearance as a policy plank in party platforms this election, and about how animal welfare laws may be lacking in Canada. I love animals, but I'm not a vegetarian. But that doesn't mean I don't care about how animals are treated. No one wants any animal to suffer or to be treated cruelly. Our laws should reflect this value. And it looks like political parties are starting to see that this is a popular issue. But is this an issue that we'll only really talk about during the campaign to capture attention and sympathy, only to have it fade into the background once someone forms government? Are animal welfare laws going to change? And do they need to? You be the judge. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.